really giving us, I would even say, the most complete systematic system of meditation in the Jewish tradition until the 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah. Abulafia lays it out very explicitly, systematically. You do this and this and this, and this happens or this happens, and then you do this and then you do this. In very particular, meticulous instructions for how to meditate and, according to Abulafia, how to attain prophecy.
What can I refer to you as? Tomer, Dr. Persico, Professor?
No, Tomer, of course.
Tomer, of course?
Yeah, of
Okay,
course.
Wonderful. We're here on the beautiful Shalom Hartman campus as part of the interview series that we're doing together. And I thought we'd just jump right into the subject.
Let's go.
There are many, many books that have been written about Jewish spirituality, Jewish mysticism, all kinds of stuff, even many books on Jewish meditation.
Right.
But
I have them.
you have some of those?
Oh,
All of them?
do I? Yeah.
I'm sure your wife is very happy with the
Yeah,
full collection. There's, but I think there's maybe only one real proper scholarly academic study of Jewish meditation done in a seriously rigorous, methodologically sound way, and that might be your book.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually think you're right. I think I literally wrote the book.
You wrote the book on it.
Yeah, so yes, I wanted to really have a panoramic, chronological survey of the major trends, as it were, of Jewish meditation, past and present. I take it to the present, and what my dissertation, this is my dissertation, what it tried to show is how different, if indeed, are modern, contemporary Jewish meditative techniques than ancient meditation techniques. How are they different? And even conjecture, why are they different? Why, let me ask a simple question, why don't you see a lot of Jews today, when practicing Jewish meditation, doing kavanot and yichudim, Lurianic, Kabbalistic kavanot and yichudim, and connecting the sfirot?
Right,
You don't see that a lot.
Right.
There's a reason for that, right?
Right. It's not the flavor of the month.
Yeah.
So maybe briefly, I know this is a real challenge because scholars like to do things slowly and carefully, and they don't like to give quick overviews. But for the sake of the medium,
Yeah.
could you give us a brief overview of the major trends of Jewish meditative traditions from the beginning of time until 2022?
How much time? Yeah. So,
Go for it.
okay, but first we need to lay some ground facts, let's say. We need to understand, first of all, that meditation was never a central tenet of the Jewish tradition. In order to do that, maybe let's imagine our known iconography of the Buddha. And, just imagine what comes up to your mind when you imagine the Moses.
I'll put them
right?
up here on screen.
Yeah, okay. I mean, if so our iconography is the Buddha sitting cross-legged with eyes half closed, hands on his lap, etc. Moses is coming down the mountain with 2 slabs of stone written, with commandments written on them, right? There's a difference there.
Yeah.
There's a difference that bespeaks something very fundamental. Buddhism is about meditation, about many other things, but certainly about meditation. Judaism is about law, it's about revelation, it's about covenant, it's about many things, but not so much meditation. Now that makes meditation, first of all, again, not a central tenet, but it also makes it, in a way, voluntary and as such very diverse. Why? Because the Buddha gave meditation instructions. The Buddha said, meditate this way. And then, of course, there are all kinds of variations of Buddhist meditation, but you've got your major trunk and branches branching out of it. In Judaism, you don't have that trunk. There's no trunk. If you want to meditate as a Jew, you have to, make something up or take something from tradition and make it into meditation, or develop your own system or get a revelation of a system. But anyway, you're not basing yourself on any former major system or instructions, right? You open the Bible, there's no instructions. You open the Talmud, there's no instructions. Okay. So there are many, many different avenues that Jewish meditation took along the generations. And we can talk about meditation in the Bible, meditation in the days of the Second Temple, meditation in the days of in the Middle Ages, meditation in early modernity, meditation in modernity, and they are all different, actually different kinds of meditation.
So what you're saying is because there was no one central meditative tradition, unlike in some other traditions like Buddhism, it allowed for a certain creativity of expression and innovation for each generation to kind of make it up as they went along.
Yes, and diversity. It's very diverse, very different systems.
But even with that, you would say that it never became a central motif in Judaism.
No, it never became a central motif. It of course is never halakha. You're not commanded to do it.
Right.
And indeed, some Jewish strands even looked down upon meditation or said it was forbidden. So it's always on the periphery. Though maybe very important for those who are practicing it, and maybe even granting them creative developments that they later will bequeath Judaism and will continue to influence Judaism onwards, but the meditation itself is not central. Having said that, I will say that there are some certain communal traits that the different systems of meditation in Judaism have. And those are, first of all, that meditation usually in the Jewish tradition has something to do with language, and the Hebrew language at that, of course, the Holy Tongue, God's own language. So language takes a prominent part, and the names of God, written, of course, in Hebrew, spoken in Hebrew, also take a prominent part. And then you've got a movement upwards. Okay, meditation is towards God. It's not inward usually. It's usually upward. Either you are yourself traveling to upper realms, or you are signaling up, changing the worlds up there, influencing the world that way.
With some important exceptions, I'm assuming.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are always these exceptions. But again, you can count on Jewish meditation usually to be that. And again, always you can also notice usually that the meditation has something to do with the law, something to do with the mitzvot. Not always. There is a lot of anomic, as it were, meditation, not concerning the law, but a lot of it is based on or integrated into the halakha. Okay?
Got it.
Some very rare is antinomic. Anti-halakha, this is Sabbateanism, etc., but really, very rare.
The renegade mystics.
Yes. Again, but again, and also groups that in the end took off from Judaism into another stream. That's generally the traits that you will find. Okay.
So some of the core themes that we're going to find across mystical traditions within Judaism.
Yes. Now, if we want to look at Judaism itself, and maybe you should tell me, do you want me to start with the Bible? Because if we look at the Bible, we will notice that it's very hard to find meditation in the Bible. And on the other hand, it's very easy to take all sorts of sporadic, random verses and insert into them a meaning of meditation, saying, Jacob went to the field to pray. He actually performed meditation or such stuff. Right. So you want to talk a little bit about the Bible?
I think that's an important point, because I think that sometimes those that are familiar with Jewish literature and the Bible, which is a very familiar text here in the West, assume that the categories that they're using to think about their own religiosity are the same categories happening there. And that you're saying is a mistake. The example that you gave of Jacob going to pray, right? That's already a two-step abstraction, because in the text, he goes to speak in the field. And it's the rabbis who make that prayer, and then us who make that meditation.
Exactly.
So that would be helpful if you could take us sort of from the Bible until today and just briefly talk about how you see that development taking place and what's not happening as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I wanted to find meditation in the Bible, I initially said, I'm not going to reinterpret or translate any verses into what I think should be meditation, assuming that he must have meditated, obviously, because, right? Also, there's a lot of talk about the prophets meditating, right? But when you look at the prophets, actually, you don't see any sign of meditation. And quite the contrary, you see that they are quite surprised when they have the revelation of God. I mean, God speaks to them and, oh my God, like again, and sometimes they run away. It doesn't seem like a person who took a lot of time and effort to get to that place and who wants that revelation.
Aren't there schools of prophecy that are practicing and training for prophetic experience?
Okay. So, apart from the usual prophets, the classical prophets that we have books of, there's another genre of prophets in the Bible, which are the Bnei Nevi'im, or the Nevi'im, which are of that type. And these are the Nevi'im that Chazal, that our sages later say, have schools of. They are not Nevi'im who come to the people and say, you have done wrong, repent, and, thus and thus is going to happen. Not such Nevi'im, not Yirmiyahu and Ezekiel, etc., Jeremiah. These are prophets who we can see, for example, and this is specifically one point where we can actually see meditation in the Bible, in first book of Samuel, chapter 10. There Samuel sends Saul, who he has just christened as king in private, to Givat Elohim, hill of God, where he will meet a band of Nevi'im, prophets, and prophesy with them. And Saul does this, he prophesizes, and he changes. He becomes another man, Ish Acher. And people look and say, is Saul among the prophets? We didn't know, etc. And there you can discern also the method of meditation, because Samuel says to Saul, you will see these people, and they are coming off the bama, the little worship platform for worship, with a chalil, v'kinor, v'tof, with musical instruments, with a flute and a violin or a harp, really, and a drum. So it is clear that music was used for the attainment of a mystical or ecstatic state of consciousness. And we know, by the way, that such methods were used also by the Greeks somewhere else in the Mediterranean at approximately that time. So I mean, it's pretty clear that this is the method that they used.
Is there any term there in the biblical context that would refer to meditation in what's going on?
No, there's no letargel, to practice or anything like that. They just prophesy. That's what they do. So, by the way, they prophesy, and the Spirit of God transcends on Saul.
Okay.
And a chapter later, you see why that's important, because a chapter later, that's Nachash Amoni sieging on Yavesh Gilad, some evil character, and the whole people, when hearing about this, everybody starts to cry. And when Saul hears about this, and he is still a king in secret, he becomes the Spirit of God enters him, he becomes angry, and he goes to war against Nachash, and, he takes care of things. And so it's clear that the Spirit of God gave him what nobody else had, which is courage, initiative, etc.
It's funny because usually you're the one playing this critical role, telling people what they think is happening in the Bible is not actually happening. And I want to press this point a bit further, which is why are we making the assumption that they're partaking in meditative practice or having mystical experience? Maybe those are assumptions that are being put into the text. They could just say that they're playing instruments and the divine spirit rests upon them. Why is that meditative or mystical?
Okay, well, that's a good question. I mean, they're saying they're prophesying, but why consider this mystical?
Or meditative.
Let's perhaps define our
the time has come.
our terminology. Meditation for me is any initiated practice meant to cause a change or transformation of consciousness in a way that is therapeutic, epistemological, or soteriologically beneficial for the practitioner. Epistemologic meaning something that you didn't know before. Therapeutic is, of course, a healing or well-conducing state. And soteriological is a nice word for redemptive.
Salvific.
Salvific, yeah.
I'm going to put that on the screen because I know that's a definition that you've hewed very carefully and you've
exactly
used very precisely.
This is what I use also in my dissertation and in my book.
And this is your own definition
Yes.
in the field. You felt that there wasn't an adequate definition
That's
previously.
Right. That's right. Usually when you open books about meditation, even today, you will encounter definitions that talk about inwardness, getting some calmness, some
States of passivity.
pacific states of contemplation. Yeah, no, certainly those are meditative states or can be. But there are a lot more ways to change your consciousness in ways that are religiously significant or theologically significant for you. You can fast. You can dance around the fire to the sound of drums. You can flagellate yourself. You can hyperventilate. You can say a mantra. You can do many, many different things that for me are certainly meditative.
Those are all forms of meditation.
Yes, definitely. And why? Because they are religiously significant. You are doing something voluntarily and with an intent to get closer to God, to see something that is holy, to get a message from the divine, etc.
Wonderful. So let's bring your definition then back to that verse with Saul.
Yeah. Saul is definitely changing his consciousness voluntarily and with will to a state that is for him, I would say, perhaps also epistemologically significant and certainly redemptive in the way that it changes him, and the text says it changes Saul, and in a way that is beneficial to save the entire people later, or even only Yavesh Gilad, but as part of the greater people of Israel, right? Remember, redemption in the Bible is very political. It's not an individual, saving. It's a monarchy.
It's such a difficult task. I'm just thinking about this sort of the meta project that you're undertaking here to separate texts in as best as we can get to the original context with the way that they're being read for thousands of years. And Judaism is commentaries on commentaries on commentaries. And I know that you know that in Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, this verse of Saul becoming a new person is read in a very elaborate metaphysical context of this angelification. So it must be very difficult to put that all aside and to be like, okay, we're just going to look at the text in its original cultural linguistic context. Well, without Maimonides, without Rashi.
Yes, but I have the advantage of growing up secular. So I didn't really immerse myself in those texts when I was a child.
That is helpful. Okay, so moving then, there may be an assumption here that we can make that, and I'm curious to know what you think of it. And let's. I think there's a lot of Jewish history to cover, so we have to continue moving.
Yeah, of course.
You're saying that we don't see any explicit talk of meditation the way that you defined it. These intentional undertakings of mental or physical activity to bring about epistemological.
There's no instructions. There's no meditative instructions in the Bible.
Can we assume though that if there are schools of prophets, and we do see what you're identifying as meditation in those instances, that the prophets, what we might call the literary prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, that they are also partaking in their own meditation, just that it's not being explicit in the text?
But I don't see why to assume that if they have their revelations without any preparation and sometimes not only to their surprise but to their dissatisfaction. Like, why wouldn't you assume that some meditative action had preceded that?
So you're saying prophetic experiences can come to someone who has prepared for it and who hasn't prepared for it.
But these are different prophecies. These are different prophets, different types of prophets. There are the Jeremiahs, the Ezekiels, the Isaiahs. These are one type of prophets that are, reprimanding the people, bringing the message of God, etc. And there are these other kinds of prophets which don't have books written of them, and they are just ecstatic experiencers that get into this ecstatic state. Usually, by the way, research shows that they are connected to battles. Usually, they are berserk fighters running into battle, fanatically calling out the name of God, etc., etc. So if we actually want a point of connection between these two genres, it would be the prophet Elijah, who was a prophet that something is written on him, and he was quite a character, obviously, I mean, and famous, but he was a fighter. You know, he fought idolatry with a sword in his hand, not with words.
Right.
So that I would say is the
Interesting. Okay, so that's the beginning. That's looking at some of the biblical prophets, and you're distinguishing between the prophets that are coming to classically speak truth to power, and their words being recorded and reprimand the people, versus the people that are entering these ecstatic frenzies for whatever religious or military purposes.
Which are connected, of course.
Yes. What happens when we move past the Bible into Apocrypha, Pseudepigrapha, Second Temple, rabbinic literature? What do we see there?
Something happens along the time of the Second Temple, before and after the destruction. So we're talking first century. And what happens is that the direction of redemption changes from somewhere in the distant future to somewhere in the distant upward realms, to somewhere up there, not out in the future. And there's a whole metaphysics that becomes common knowledge that there are realms up above this world, 7 heavens, as it were, in which different angels and different forces and God finally also exist and live there, as it were. And this is not only Jewish, but as I said, common knowledge. The Gnostics have this in different forms. Christians, you can see St. Paul talking about being taken up to the third heaven. There's this verse. And of course, our first major, real mystical system of Judaism, which is the Hechalot and the Merkava mysticism, developed in the early centuries CE, and up until the 8th, 9th century, something like that. We have a collection of texts talking about celestial journeys and giving instructions how to conduct those journeys. So what we have there, and maybe first we'll talk about who's writing this text, because these are not our sages.
Just to clarify, is this the person who dies and their soul ascends, or this is during one's lifetime?
That's a fantastic question. It's certainly during the lifetime. The question is whether it is in the body or whether some sort of astral body or soul leaves the body and ascends to the heavens. It's a question that I think the texts themselves do not decide upon. I don't know if they even had a understanding of a difference between an inner entity and an outer body. It's a question because for Judaism this came a bit late, at the 10th century. Talks about soul, etc. So it's a good question, but let's just come back to who are these people? Now, these people are not the sages. They take the names of the sages, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, but they are not the sages. We know that the sages, the people who wrote the Talmud, backed away from them. They didn't think it was a good idea. They didn't think this was a endeavor that should be taken. They were people of halakha. They thought the way to connect with the divine after the destruction of the temple is by praying and by studying Torah. Torah is what we have from the divine. These people thought differently. They thought that the destruction of the temple requires us to have a substitute temple. Not a temple on the ground, but a temple in the sky that we can pilgrimage to. We can make a pilgrimage to
a celestial temple.
Yes. And see God. And remember, this is what you came to Jerusalem for, to שלוש פעמים בשנה יראה כל זכורך.
It's פני השם לקחה.
Yeah. It's like you see the face of God, really.
Right.
It's the Nikud is, of course, 10th century. You come to see the presence. The presence is, you don't actually go into the Holy of Holies, but it's there. And that's what you're there for. And they substituted that for a celestial journey, apparently. Done in life. Your question also relates to the Gnostics. The Gnostics would say it's after you're dead.
Once you're freed from your prison.
Exactly. Yeah, they were not. Yeah. So they were not dualists that way. Right. Our Tomer Persico and Hechalot. And And so you ascend up, you go through all the 7 different...
Can I just pause you for a second?
please.
You keep saying ascend, but as far as I understand that, your day Merkava.
Yeah, but this is a common misunderstanding. Your day, it's not...
To descend.
It's not...
Just to translate.
In Hebrew, laredet, your day, it's to descend, it's people who descend.
Yeah.
But it has another meaning. To laredet, your day, is also people going on a journey. Your day yam is another word for sailors. Right?
Yordei Mitzrayim.
And your day Duma, people who go for a journey to the dead, to Hades, right? So these are people who go on a journey.
Got it.
Upwards.
Got it.
So how do they do it? We were given instructions, and usually it has to do with reciting a certain secret name of the divine. We're talking a very long name made of a few, it's like 10 names that are considered one big secret name of God.
It's like one German word.
But and it's with usually all the different parts of it are ended with the word El. So like Yechezkel and Gabriel and Michael, the angels, like that. So something else, something else, something else, something else. All this together is a name of the divine, and at the end it has Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, the Tetragrammaton. It's clear that it is the divine, and you are reciting that 112 times. That's the instructions in Hechalot Rabbati, one of the texts. You should be very careful not to do over 112 times, not to do under. It's a very particular name. It's clear that if you pronunciate something, you might be dead. You know, you might be killed for it.
Yes. The stakes are high.
The stakes are very high. You go up. You have to remember the names of 4 angels in each heaven. 2 to the left of the door, 2 to the right of the door. Each heaven has its own angels. You need to know, you are this and this El, you are thus and thus El, you are this, you are this. If you don't, it's like a password. If you don't mention their names, you're dead. And at the 7th heaven, you have a vision of the divine sitting on the throne. There are like very poetic, magnificent descriptions of seeing the divine there, and you're just in a gush of feelings and emotions. You're reciting different names of the divine, and so that's the epitome of the journey. And usually you also get something. You get a little magic spell, or you get a little knowledge of the future. You get something.
Some souvenirs.
Yeah, to take down with you.
From the gift store.
It's considered totally. And you know, we should watch out not to interfere here with the Protestant devaluation of magic that we, as living in a Protestant culture, take upon ourselves. There was no devaluation of magic. Magic is important.
It's real and serious.
Yeah, like doing stuff in the world with knowledge you got from God is fantastic. That's what it's good. It's a Jewish mystic does stuff. Yeah. He helps his community.
Right. They bring the rain if they need to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important.
We may need a mystic to hold the rain.
So it's not like you're there only for your own, specific magnificent vision. You're also there for the whole community.
Right. which adds maybe something to your definition of meditation, which is not just that it's personally salvific, but it also has implications for the broader cultural context that one is living in.
Yes, almost always also. Maybe we should add that as a running trend within Jewish meditation. Right. It's not only for yourself.
Right. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of very famous Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. Yeah. He has the steps on the clock, and the last one is to bring back the bounty to the original place that they left from. There's maybe a similarity there. You know, it's interesting because you've clearly spent so long with these texts in such an intimate way that it's almost like you're speaking from experience. Like you went up yourself and you hung out with the angels, and you're like,
no, I didn't.
Okay.
Just to make, I will tell you something. The first time I taught this, I read the text and I read all the names of the angels out loud for my students, and quite a short time afterwards, I became coarse. I couldn't speak. And that was the last time I read those names out loud. So, but that's that sums up my experience reciting those names.
That was the warning shot. Saying Tomer, watch yourself. I like that a lot. From your intimate knowledge of these texts and from your own engagement with them and study of them, do you have a sense of whether these 112 times that this very elaborate, complex name of God is recited, is that being done magically, theologically, mantraically, meditatively, if those distinctions are viable at all?
No, so it's, we can only conjecture, we can only guess. But yes, if looking at this from a meditation research point of view, I would say that this is used as a type of mantra that demands both a very good memory, because also you need to remember the names of the angels, and very good concentration, right? You're reciting a very elaborate name of the divine 112 times. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of mental effort that you're putting into this. And again, from a very scientific point of view, it brings you into a state of trance of sorts, I would say.
Yeah, there's going to be physiological activity if you're undertaking that kind of
certainly neurological activity. Something happens.
Right. Let's bracket the metaphysical question of where they're actually going and what they're actually encountering and what's really happening, and let's focus on the psychological or the phenomenological as far as we can tell. What do you think is where these mystics, we can call them, where of the that are depicted in the Hechalot and Merkava literature, what is happening to them? Where are they going? What can we determine?
Okay. I believe for them, first of all, there was no separate soul from the body. As our sages also believed, a person is constructed or built, or I don't know, created of three elements: from the Father, from the Mother, and from God. God breathed the breath of life into a person, but it's not a soul that's separate. It's just something that makes it live. And what they thought, I think, was that they are going on a journey. If we leave metaphysics aside, obviously it happened mentally. They were totally immersed in it and were able to experience it as though they were actually living it. It was a sort of a lucid dream. Again, very meticulously relegated or regimented. It was not a free-for-all. They couldn't simply fly to the sky. They knew where they were going into. It had to do with a lot of memory and a lot of concentration. And if they were able to keep up some sort of memory and concentrative effort, they were rewarded by this extreme experience of, divine vision. If there is something similar to this in different traditions, in another tradition, I think we might do well to compare it to the Kalachakra ritual of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. In it, elder Buddhist monks, Tibetan Buddhist monks, enter into this mandala that they have built, but enter it mentally with instructions from the Dalai Lama. They are, as it were, going through the mandala, and it's a sort of initiation that is supposed to get them closer to nirvana or whatever, okay? So there is this structure of concentric squares or circles that you enter and go through, and beneficially, and it's beneficially, for you.
I'm curious. That's a rich it's a helpful comparison. I know that there are later Jewish authors who are reading these journeys as internal journeys, as psychological journeys.
It's interesting. If you take the Talmud, in Chagiga, and you see Rashi says, נכנסו לפרדס, עלו לשמיים, עלו לרקיע על ידי שם. Went up to the heavens by a name, using a name. So Rashi obviously knows about this technique, right? But if you look at the Tosfot, they say, עלו לשמיים, לא, סליחה, השתמשו בשם, something like that, אבל לא עלו, אלא היה נדמה להם שעלו. So they didn't actually go to the heavens, but it seemed to them as if they went to the heavens. So the Tosfot take effort to sort of correct Rashi and say, look, don't think this is an actual physical journey, this is just a mental journey.
That's quite interesting. That seems to be quite a modern psychologizing read on the text.
Yeah,
and I mean, Tosfot, just to be clear for the audience, is not writing in the 21st century. Tosfot is 30. When are they writing?
No, but yeah, it's
Middle Ages,
12,
13.
13, yeah. But for the Tosfot, Judaism has already integrated the idea of a separate soul and an internal dimension to a person. Rashi has not yet, or not yet completely. So for them, it is clear, the minute you have an idea of a soul, a pure, heavenly, eternal entity that you really are, the body becomes secondary, even something, derogative.
That transition happens so quickly between Rashi and Tosfot. They're just a generation or two apart.
I can only say, this is the text. I don't know. They're 2 generations apart.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, we know that Saadia Gaon, for example, 10th century, also already is like the Tosfot. He also says, no, it's not a real journey. So it's about that time that these ideas enter Judaism. Rashi might not have been convinced by them, maybe have not heard of them. We don't know. But anyway, that is the time that Judaism incorporates that idea. And we know that obviously that idea is very pronounced in Kabbalah. Kabbalah already has a soul, different souls.
So we'll get to there in a second. But I'm just curious, before we move on, and I do want to move on, as a scholar reading these texts with a broad understanding of their historical and literal and cultural context, how much do you think these, like, say, the readings of people like Tosafot and Saadia Gaon, how much are they doing violence to the text in their original context, and how much are they being true to the text? What's your sense on that?
I don't know. It's a funny question, I have to say, because, I mean, Judaism always takes a text. I mean, this is the Jewish tradition, taking a text and reinterpreting it, isn't it?
Right.
So, I mean, I certainly wouldn't use the word violence. And I mean, if you ask me, Saadia Gaon and the Tosfot are not looking at the text the way the original authors looked at them. The original authors thought they were ascending with the body, or with a sort of a body. We can argue about it, but so they're interpreting it differently. But that's what Jews do.
Right. Sure. Certainly. Yeah. Violence maybe is, in our tradition, is the wrong word. It's much more of a dance, perhaps, between texts. I'm curious for myself, and maybe we don't have to dwell on this for a long time, but you seem to have a fair degree of certainty on authorial intent, which is something that modern thinkers tend to be more skeptical and dubious of. How do you say with such confidence that this is what they were thinking when they wrote it?
Look, first of all, again, it's not that I know; it's that I assume. But reading a lot of texts, you get some sense of what a person means. I mean, if they thought they were traveling via the soul, leaving the body on earth, they would write it, right? I mean, why wouldn't they simply say, and then your soul exits your body, and it's not written.
Gotcha.
And we have also a certain piece of evidence from St. Paul, as I said. He says, I know of a person who was taken to the third heaven. He means himself.
Right.
Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. And this person, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know, was beheld some very secrets or something like that.
Yeah.
So St. Paul himself, speaking about himself, is at a loss whether he was taken to the third heaven in the body or out of the body. And so it also gives us another, another clue that these people thought they were going up in the body. And St. Paul is a Hellenistic Jew. And that's why for him, the soul is already a factor, etc.
There are some scholars like Siegel, and I think Wolfson follows him in this, that he reads that actually as a Merkava quotes, text in that fragment, and maybe the first such
What, St. Paul?
Yeah, yeah,
As a Merkava?
yeah. As a Merkava experience.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same metaphysics.
Right,
That's
right,
what I'm saying.
right.
This is common knowledge. There are heavens,
Right,
God sits
right.
there, angels, and then if you're St. Paul, you also know that metaphysics, and if you have a fantastic mystical experience, you
Right.
interpret it by those
Right.
metaphysics.
We have to remember as well that now he's St. Paul, but back in home he was Shaul of Tarsus, and so
Yeah.
it's not some Christian guy writing; it's a Jewish guy
yeah.
writing, right?
Yeah, it's this Jewish, Prushi,
Right.
halachically
Yeah,
Jew,
yeah,
a halachic Jew, assumingly
right.
learning from Rabban Gamliel,
Yeah.
we don't know, right? But
Again, a need to separate what we now think of people and what may have happened.
Yeah.
So you've taken us very beautifully up until the 10th century.
Thank you.
I hope my questions haven't been too acerbic or critical. I hope it's been helpful. Okay, good. Okay, wonderful. So, what's the next great trend in Jewish mysticism?
So we know that.
Jewish meditation, rather.
So I will answer your first question.
Okay.
The next great trend in Jewish mysticism is, of course, Kabbalah. Kabbalah that surfaces in the 13th century. And there's the Zohar, and there's the Sfirot, and everything. But it's not really the next great phase of Jewish meditation. Because if you look at the first Kabbalistic texts, we're talking about south of France, north of Spain, 12th, 13th century, Sefer HaBahir, Girona, Mekubalim, these groups, the Zohar, you don't really see a lot of mystical experiences or meditation. There are some, I'm not saying there's entirely not, but there certainly is not a system there, not people who are saying, do this and then you will, nothing like that, not instructions. And so classical Kabbalah at that stage really doesn't offer us something that we can really write home about. What you do have in that time and a bit before is, first of all, Maimonides, who, if you look at chapter 51, third part of Guide to the Perplexed, is, I think, very clearly teaching meditation, teaching a sort of concentrative, contemplative meditation.
Certainly seems so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And his student, Rabbi Avraham Abulafia, living in Italy in the 13th century, and taking Maimonides, connecting his system with Sefer Yetzirah, and really giving us, I would even say, the most complete systematic system of meditation in the Jewish tradition until the 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah. Abulafia lays it out very explicitly, systematically. You do this and this and this, and this happens or this happens, and then you do this and then you do this. In very particular, meticulous instructions for how to meditate, and according to Abulafia, how to attain prophecy.
Right. Can we add, though, that besides being the most comprehensive meditation system, which I would like to hear more about in a moment, taking from Sefer Yetzirah, from Maimonides, from Hasidic Ashkenaz as well, from many, many sources, also outside of Judaism, and quite open about that. Can we add also that it's one which is still being practiced today, or even being revived today in contemporary Jewish spirituality?
Oh, yeah. So Abulafia has had a very great revival, resurgence in the 20th century. We need to know that he was excommunicated, basically, from the time he lived till the 20th century. I mean, for some, he still is. His books have never been printed before the 20th century. But he was very influential, and indeed, take any book by Edel, and Edel will show you how whatever you're reading is connected to Abulafia. But he was a very influential Kabbalist, and even though he was excommunicated, as said. And again, he laid out a very systematic method for meditation.
Yeah, it's maybe one of the greatest comebacks in the history of Jewish mysticism, we could say.
Yeah, I mean,
it's incredible.
Him, and I would say he gets some competition from Breslov, who have also come back from from a very small to a cultural phenomenon that's crazy.
Interesting. I know you've done some work as well, along with some other researchers, like Jonathan Gabb on contemporary forms of Jewish spirituality. So maybe we'll sort of make our way to that
Yeah.
slowly. And of course, this is all part of one big story. Could you open us up a little? What is happening in the meditative tradition of Abulafia, and then from there we'll move back into the Kabbalists.
So Abulafia, in short, gives us a system of reciting or articulating the name of God, different names of God, by the way, incorporating into that breathing exercises and even hishtachvuyot, prostrations between each name, between different parts of the name, etc. All that in a very long meditative practice that culminates, as we said, in what he believes is prophecy, and it's like seeing a divine vision and also getting a message from God. So that's Abulafia, and he has a few iterations of, different ways of practicing this, different names of God, etc. Okay. So this is Abulafia. And again, Kabbalah doesn't offer us anything close to that.
Let me just ask you a quick question before we get back to Kabbalah.
Yeah,
Abulafia, you're describing a system that's very complex in its linguistic as an element of it, which has been studied a lot. You're also bringing, there's an embodied component to it.
Yeah, definite embodied component.
Right.
Breathing and physical prostration.
Right. And it's something which I've seen is very important for you in your research to bring the embodied component. And I'd like to speak about that when we talk about methodology. Okay. How much, just very quickly, in terms of Abulafia's influences, what truth is there to the claim that Abulafia is being influenced by forms of yoga or other forms of Sufi meditation? What do you think?
If anything, I would say Sufi meditation. And I mean, I think it's not hard to imagine that he was influenced by this and that. These things were known. People shared knowledge. It was not taboo to dabble in other traditions. I think today the borders between traditions are much stricter than they were. And there's no reason to believe he wasn't influenced. Having said that, though, his method is pretty original. So he might have taken from yoga something about the breathing, let's say, and he might have taken from the Sufis, mentioning of God's name. But putting this all together, if he even had, he put things together in such an original way that you just find nowhere else. He was a brilliant man, very pretentious also, thinking maybe he was a Messiah, the Messiah, sorry. And so, but we need to give him credit for what he deserves.
Got you. Let's move then back into the Kabbalists. What do we find in the Kabbalists by way of meditation?
Okay, so when we get to Lurianic meditation, Kabbalah, this we're talking 16th century and onwards, this is where we find actual serious systems of meditation. First and foremost, the Kavanot and the Yichudim, instructions for how to manage, how to manipulate, how to join together in your mental space names of the divine, the tetragrammaton with the Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud name, and this is the most simple matching, of course, and there are many, many different names. Doing so while praying, and having done so, influencing the whole upper body of the celestial sphirot, the centers, the power centers of the divine, and thus allowing divine affluence to descend and enrich us all. Right? And so you have that. You have Yichudim and Kavanot. You have Kavanot, which you do during prayer. Yichudim, usually you do.
Can you just translate those words for the audience?
Yeah. So Kavanot is like intentions. Yeah. You basically, it's a intentional stance which you take towards the names of God and towards influencing the Sphirot. You are praying and you intend to and thus you join the names of...
And that would be the second word, which is Yehudim, which is to unify or to join.
Yeah, Yehudim is unifications.
Got it.
You unify different parts of God. The whole premise in Kabbalah is that the body of God, or the God's existence is separated into different centers, and they are not particularly, or they're not rightly aligned and unified.
Right.
And the Kabbalist's job is to unify and align those sfirot in order for the world to work and finally get redeemed.
Right. So this is the great Lurianic myth of Shira and Tikkun, that the divine itself has been fractured, and the masculine and the feminine have been torn apart, and whatever it is, and we're trying to bring that rectification.
Exactly.
I want to ask a similar question that we asked earlier when we were speaking about the Merkava mystics, which is... And I know that this question is particularly important to your research because you do a lot of work looking at the way that older forms of meditation are being reread in modern contexts, sometimes legitimately and sometimes illegitimately. So the way that you described the Lurianic form of meditation now, in very medieval terms, that there's some sort of divine realm, and through our magical words we can create some effect, what we may call theurgy, and do terms that no one in the 21st century are really going to be, besides for maybe a handful of Kabbalists, are really going to be connecting with in any real way. I'm just curious. Let me try something, and you tell me whether it's legitimate or illegitimate. Luria sees the primary role to reunite, let's say, Kucha Brichu and Shechina, the masculine and feminine. Shechina, the feminine, the goddess, which emerges from the Zohar and Sefer Abahir, is identified often at times with the ecclesia of Israel, Knesset Yisrael, the collection of the souls of the Jewish people. So in some way, when he's uniting these two aspects of God, and the terminology is moving around all the time there, this, but often describing the same unification in different language, Zah and Nukva and Bina and Malchus, whatever it is, because he's identifying as soul of Israel, which is part of the Shekhinah, is he not identifying with that feminine aspect and therefore uniting himself with the masculine in that unification? Which means that it's not just something above and beyond that he's bringing together, but he himself is being changed and being united in that experience?
No doubt about it.
Okay.
There are clear texts that show that. Let's put this in order. The first imperative of the Kabbalists is to rectify the upper worlds. This is Tikkun Olam. Okay, that's what they do. That's what they're here for. But the upper world is the macrocosmos for their own microcosmos. They are changing anytime something changes up there, and anytime they change, something changes up there. There's a resonance flowing all the time. There's alignment all the time between upper and lower, the person here and the persona of God there. And it's very clear from the text. When you do this and this, you rectify that, but you also are filled with the divine spirit, and you yourself are connected to your root, and no doubt about it.
Got it.
Yeah.
So
but it's important. I mean, there is truth in what you said in the way that it's less important for them. Maybe, I mean, what differentiates them maybe from modern day mystics is that it's not their first imperative to go through a spiritual process and become enlightened or realize liberation, or that's not what they do. What they do is rectify the world. But yes, they are mystics. They do. I mean, something happens to them.
Got it. So what I hear you saying is that there is ways that these medieval practices could be read in a modern context that wouldn't be entirely delegitimate to them itself, although their emphasis may not have been where the modern person's emphasis is.
Yes. I mean, look, let's take a very clear example, if I'm allowed to. The Kabbalah Center or the Bnei Baruch movement, both neo-Kabbalistic movements today, I don't think they're not legitimate. They can do whatever they want. Jews reinterpret texts. That's what we do. But if you look at what they are studying and what they are practicing, it's not classical Kabbalah and it's not Lurianic Kabbalah, because at the end they are not interested first and foremost in rectifying the world, but in rectifying themselves in an inner spiritual process. Was there an inner spiritual process in Lurianic Kabbalah at least? Yes. It was never the primary goal, and it was never everything you talked about. Indeed, you talked very little about that and a whole lot about rectifying the upper worlds. Open any book of Kabbalah, Luria's Etz Chaim, or Chaim Vital's Etz Chaim, or Cordovero's Pardes Rimonim. Or open these books. What are they writing about? They're writing 200 pages of how to, unite this Sphira and this Sphira, and you do this mitzvah, and etc. And they're writing a page about getting the Holy Spirit or experiencing this and that.
Right.
That's the ratio.
Right. I hear that. Let me play devil's advocate here for the modern mystic, and you can tell me that I'm just a Hasidic kid who grew up in a Hasidic community, and therefore I'm reading these texts through my own lens, as we inevitably are.
Which community, by the way?
Chabad. If you haven't picked up already.
I could have guessed, yeah.
For these mystics, when you say that they're rectifying the world, I assume you mean the spiritual world, the olamot,
the divine world,
right, the divine world.
Yeah.
They're not sending fruit packages to Haiti.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
So they're also in their own theosophy and metaphysics. They're identifying their own internal world with the divine world. And those two things are seen as mirror images to one another.
Yeah,
this is an
definitely.
idea which goes back even before the Kabbalists,
That's
right? So can we say that ratio that you're distinguishing between fixing the divine world versus what happens to the self is maybe drawing the line at an artificial place? Because if they're seeing the divine world as just a mirror of the inner world...
That's right. Yes, definitely. It's not, for them, it's not separate worlds. There's no clear line between what we today call subjective and objective parts of reality. It's all one, one flowing continuum. Yes, but again, I read the texts and I see what interests them, what concerns them, what they're worried about, and it's not their inner life. Usually, also, but first and foremost, the world. But
maybe that's how they're speaking about their inner life.
Okay, so look, first of all, they are concerned with their inner. I don't want to belittle this too much. Like Rabbi Yosef Karo or Rabbi Chaim Vital talked endlessly about, they wrote diaries.
Yeah.
So yes, but again, Kabbalah as a system is not concerned about the Kabbalist, but about the upper Spherotic world. Now, were they talking about the Spherotic world, but actually meaning inner worlds? How can you prove this or disprove it? It's just, I can't, how can I defend my position? Maybe?
Right. I guess the way to prove it sometimes would be to see authors that are saying, when we speak about Olamot Elyonim, we're actually speaking about...
And who did that? The Hasidim did.
Right.
The Baal Shem Tov did.
Right.
The Maggid of Mezerich did. When the Maggid of Mezerich or Ren Yaakov Yitzchak of Polnoi write about the Sfirot, they explicitly say, listen, it's all in you. It's all inside the person. Don't, bother yourself about the upper worlds. Bother yourself about your own transformation. They're saying it.
Doesn't Cordovero say the same thing now?
Who?
Cordovero? Ramak?
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
I don't think so.
We'll have to check later.
I will, but this is the Hasidic revolution. This is the Hasidic Copernican revolution, as it were.
Got it.
Putting things upside or right side up or upside down or
inside out.
Inside out, really. Yeah. Taking everything that was up there out there and internalizing it and being concerned about our own transformation.
Which in your own research you say is part of a modern revolution.
Exactly.
It's not just,
no, but just to close the other subject, I think that if Rabbi Chaim Vital or Rabbi Moshe Cordovero or the Ari would have wanted us to think about our inner worlds, they would have written it.
Okay.
Simply just as the Maggid writes.
I'm going to check my notes.
Okay.
Whoever's right buys the other person's shots.
Of course.
Got it.
Yalla.
Okay, so that brings us to the close of the Lurianic, the Great Renaissance. Let's move now into Chassidut proper. We've laid the groundwork. Unless you'd like to say a word about Shabtaot, about some of the heretical... Is there any important meditation happening there?
Maybe. Obviously there are many interesting things done in Shabtaut, but I don't think we need to go into it. I think the amount of influence it had over the Jewish meditative tradition after it was not great. We've got Frankism, but it's not really...
Got it. So why don't we move...
But Sabbateanism is one of the ways that Lurianic Kabbalah developed from the 16th century onwards. We had Sabbateanism. We had Lurianic Kabbalah being Lurianic Kabbalah. You still have Lurianic Kabbalists in the world, studying Chaim Vital, Rabbi Chaim Vital. If you go Rechovot HaNahar or Beit El Yeshivas here in Jerusalem, that's what they do. But they are a very small minority of Jewish people and Jewish mystics today. And you have Hasidism.
Yeah. Let me ask you one nerdy question before we get to the major revolution of Jewish spirituality, the only mass movement of Jewish spirituality in modernity and perhaps ever, Hasidism. Before we get to there, there's a certain stream, there are many streams that emerge from Lurianic Kabbalah. One of them is the Sarugian Kabbalah, particularly as it's picked up by people like Herrera and others, it's very much intermingled with an Italian form of Kabbalah, which according to Idel's research and others is very distinct from the Spanish, in that the Spanish is much more mythological and the Italian is much more philosophical and also much more perennial. They're engaging in the perennial tradition and they're influencing people like Pico and Ficino. Do you have anything to share on the meditative traditions amongst the Sarugian Italian philosophical Kabbalists? Because they're some of my favorite, those perennialists are my favorite Kabbalists.
So I'm sorry to disappoint you. The truth is I simply don't know enough about them.
Okay.
I don't think they had any prominent meditative techniques, and I didn't investigate them thoroughly.
Okay, I very much appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, there's intellectual honesty in saying I don't know, and the Talmud says the person should teach their tongue to say, and then when you need to say, you say. Let's move then to the great revolution of Jewish mysticism, Eastern Europe, circa 1800s, the Baal Shem Tov and his descendants.
I think first we need to say that what we have in Hasidism is the first modern Jewish renewal movement, right? Or first modern major Jewish spiritual movement. That's what we have. Hasidism lays emphasis on the individual, on the individual's inner life, on the individual's voluntary actions and intentions, on the heart, on the experience. Everything that we today recognize as modern, the modern subject really is born, let's say, right, with Hasidism in Judaism. And so it's a great revolution, and it's not a surprise that what the Hasids do with Kabbalah is change the way we perceive it completely. They internalize the whole, amazingly intricate paraphernalia of the Sfirot into the single individual person, and then they lay emphasis on an inner transformation, right?
With that radical shifting to the modern subject that's happening with Hasidism, what forms of meditation emerge in that tradition?
So, in my book, I write about two major Hasidic courts. I write about Chabad and I write about Breslov. Both are very prominent today, very influential today, and I think both, even if they were not so influential today, even objectively, they present us with very intricate and systematic, spiritual worlds and meditative techniques. If we take the Chabad court, first of all, let me say, and I hope it's not because who you are, I think Chabad presents the most fantastically brilliant jewel of a mystical system in the Jewish tradition. It's just a diamond that is, sanded meticulously from all its sides. It's amazing. It's the most non-dual Jewish system, if we're talking about non-dualism. And it's very complex, very intricate, and very interesting. And with Chabad, we've got the Admor HaZaken, Rabbi Zalman Shneur Miladi, and we've got two of his prominent students, Rabbi Aaron of
Stanishelia.
Stanishelia, and of course his son, Admor HaEmtzai. And he develops the first phase, let's say, of the meditative technique with it's a lot about mentally picturing the ways in which the divine descends and animates towards us via, very intricate levels of emanation. We need to picture that. We need to be enthralled in that to come to a certain ecstatic enthusiasm, and enthusiasm in which we do not even understand that we are there. We need to lose self-consciousness as, meaning being conscious of ourselves, but not consciousness in general. And we finally are unified with the divine. In the end, it is a process of self-nullification and unification with the divine. I think that Admor HaZaken said, "Ikar avodah zara shemachshiv atzmo keyesh." The root of idolatry is imagining ourselves as something,
as a separate entity,
as an entity, as an actual entity. We're not actual entities. We are all parts of the divine. We're on the same stream as the divine, and so that meditation goes there.
What makes that a meditative tradition as opposed to a mystical tradition? Because I think most people hear that, they're hearing mysticism, they're not hearing meditation.
Because I think it is a very intentional practice of getting into mystical states. That's what makes it meditation. You're doing it not only for learning or chanting or memorizing the divine process of emanation, but to actually get into this enthusiastic mystical state.
Would you say here that meditation is falling under the umbrella of mystical practices? Right? So there's
of course it is.
Yeah.
How can it not? Like, this is meditation. Yeah. It's a mystical practice usually. Yes, usually people,
Because, no, the reason why I asked that is because meditation in a modern mindfulness context can be separate from mysticism, right?
Okay, okay.
I don't think everyone on the yoga mat that's meditating is.
Yeah. But this is of course a very modern or postmodern interpretation of these systems. This is taking the method, the technique, of meditation, of Eastern types of meditation, and implanting it into our Western world for different reasons. So yes, most yoga practitioners or wellness or mindfulness practitioners don't expect to realize emptiness and become fully enlightened. They're not, it just doesn't interest them. They're not up for it. They want to improve their lives and to feel good, feel better.
Yeah.
So obviously it's a different context for these things, but in their original,
right,
these practices, and even then, these practices were used and dedicated towards those goals, and the Buddha even warns against settling for less than full nirvana, because you reach a stage where you feel good, so you can just let it go, right? And there's a explicit warning against it.
Interesting. Okay, so when the Alter Rebbe Shneur Zalman Liadi is meditating, he's doing it explicitly for these mystical purposes, and he's doing it in a way that you said is very integrated with a very rigorous and complex metaphysics of mysticism. There's two characters that you study in Chassidut primarily. That is Shneur Zalman Liadi, the founder of the Chabad movement, and that is Rabbi Nachman ben Feiga, the founder of the Berkeley movement. Could you put those two in contrast to one another so we can get a sense of the diversity of the Hasidic experience?
Oh, definitely. So first of all, if Rabbi Shneur lays a lot of emphasis, first of all, on learning, Rabbi Nachman doesn't. Rabbi Nachman is suspicious of the mind, suspicious of reason. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, for him, reason is the path to God. Rabbi Nachman sometimes will say, throw out your brain, throw out your mind, just live, just experience. And then again, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Ladi is a non-dualist. Everything is one. All is at the end the same thing, the same it. Rabbi Nachman, no, there is dualism. God is there, we are here. There is a halal panui between us. There is an empty space, as it were. That's a technical term he uses for a ring encircling the known universe that doesn't have God in it, because if God were there, the whole universe would have melted into God, because the universe as it is, as it were, touches God, and so it just becomes God. And for Rabbi Nachman, this is a very important thing, because the great philosophical questions that we can't answer are from that halal panui, from that empty space. That's why we have questions that are simply unanswerable, like contradictions between values, or what exactly, why is God good but doesn't heal all the sick, or whatever, right? And for Rabbi Shneur Zalman, there's no questions that can't be answered. Everything can be answered. There is a answer for everything. And this unified vision of everything has everything included in it. So there's a lot of contrast between them. They are different characters with different theologies, and indeed different interpretations of Lurianic Kabbalah, because that's what they're doing, right?
Right.
They're turning Lurianic Kabbalah into Hasidism, into different kinds of Hasidism.
Right. I'm curious to ask specifically about Rabbi Nachman's meditative practices as they were in his day and as they were today, and that's something that you've written and lectured on extensively. I'm just curious first to ask the question on the theological point you make. I know you know this as well because I came across it in one of your essays, that there's a certain well-known Torah in Rabbi Nachman's Magen Opus, the Likutei Maharan, which is Torah 51, where over there his theology seems to be perhaps closer to a non-dual, where the human subject loses their subjectivity and can unite with the necessary being God. Would you say that pushes him a little closer to the philosophical non-dual?
Perhaps, though, Rabbi Nachman wouldn't be afraid of a contradiction. Right. It's like, yes, he talks about unio mystica, a mystical union, definitely. That's what he talks about. But of course, in other places he says, no, there's an impossible rift between us and God. But for Rabbi Nachman, the system doesn't have to be totally...
It's par for the course.
Yeah.
So, but Rabbi Nachman, while he doesn't give us a systematic theology like Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he gives us a lot of things. He gives us incredible storytelling, which is an incredibly novel genre.
But there is a system of meditation.
Oh, so that's the question that I'm leading up to. What is his meditation system?
Okay. So, first of all, Rabbi Nachman instructed his followers to have an hour of hitbodedut, solitude as it were, every day. So every day you have an hour of practice. Now what do you do in that hour? Usually the instructions is to talk to God, to lay your heart before God, to cry, to beg, to whatever. But reading Rabbi Nachman, I think we can see that in its ideal, this hour of hitbodedut should be a course, a practice that will take you into unio mystica, just like we just said, to a mystical union. And for Rabbi Nachman, the system, if we can call it a system, is to develop a huge, deep urge and yearning for God, a deep, deep wish to be with God, a cry of anguish that we are separated from God, that turns into an emotional gush that simply takes over us, and we are crying and yelling and begging, and it is such an ecstatic practice that you lose yourself, you forget yourself. And Rabbi Nachman delineates how one by one your different traits fall from you. First your negative traits, lust, envy, whatever, pride. Then your positive traits also fall from you. Your intelligence and your, let's say, your humility. Everything falls away, and you yourself fall away. You are nullified, and you are united with your root. This is Rabbi Nachman's language. You are united with your root, or you are united with the imperative existent, which is God. God has to be there. We don't have to be here, but God has to be there.
We're the contingent.
Yeah, we are contingent, right? And that's it. And you're there. You're unified. And Rabbi Nachman says this is very dangerous. It can even cost you your life. You're hanging by a thread.
Right. There's no guarantee that if you lose yourself, you're going to find yourself in the checkout process.
Yeah. I mean, we know that Rabbi Nachman himself and the group that surrounded him were very radical people. These were strange people, outcasts, outliers, people that didn't get well with others, and they made a group around Rabbi Nachman. They were very talented, obviously. And so this is a radical practice for a radical group of people.
Right.
And indeed, when you look at what most Breslev Hasids do from there and today, they definitely don't, hang by a thread from death, crying, weeping, and yelling to unite with God. That's not what happens.
I'm sure there are individuals within and groups that are doing that, right?
But if you look at Breslev instructions,
right, sort of pop Breslev.
It's not only pop Breslev. Most of Breslev is pop Breslev.
Okay.
Most of Breslev today is not descendants of the families that are Breslev Hasids for the last 200 years. Most of Breslev is BT Jews, Balei Tshuva, and I'm talking 70-80% of Breslev is people who came into Breslev over the last 30 years, let's say. And they've already raised their families in Breslev, but they're, they dress like Hasidic Jews, but they're not, of that heritage.
Got it.
And there's no single Admor, there's no single tzaddik in the Breslev community. Rabbi Nachman is dead and he has no, successor. Their rabbis, when they tell them how to do hitbodedut, how to practice hitbodedut, they don't say, weep until you're ecstatically almost dead.
Right.
They do something else.
Right. It's a bit harder to sell. It's not.
It's harder to sell. They don't want their communities to experience such earth-shattering moments of ecstasy. It's not for the Baal Bayit, It's not for the normal Jew that has to get up to work tomorrow.
Right. Which is markedly different from what Rabbi Nachman's radicality and outsidership wasn't just happenstance. It was cultivated, right?
Definitely. I mean, there's the famous sentence by Rabbi Nachman he says כן, אתם יהודים כשרים, אבל לא כך רציתי. רציתי שתהיו כחיות הנוהמות כל הלילה ביער, כן? You're kosher Jews, you're good Jews, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted you to be like animals howling all night in the forest.
What an image. What a great image.
This is Rabbi Nachman, right?
Yeah. So I have kind of, we've given this very panoramic, broad retrospective on Jewish meditative practices from the Bible until today. I'm curious, I have two follow-up questions. One of them is going to be for more of a general listener, and then one is a question to you. The first is, and maybe you don't feel comfortable answering this as a scholar, and you're not here to teach people how to meditate necessarily, I don't know. If today someone that's living within the Jewish practicing tradition would like to go back to a moment in Jewish history and pick a meditative tradition that could work for them, do you have any recommendations saying that's a good place for you to start?
I'll tell you, one of my very deep-held understandings about our world is that it is different in a very fundamental way from the world even 200 years ago. We are different. We are different subjects. We are modern or postmodern subjects. Our individuality is different. Our understanding of autonomy is different. Our understanding of freedom, of conscience, of morality, of authority is different in a very fundamental way from Jews and definitely other people 200 years ago. So it's hard today to go back and pick out a method that would be good for people today.
I just felt it. So the question was...
Aren't we going to tell our viewers that we're in because of the rain outside?
Oh, yes. We just had to snap
Yeah.
our fingers and teleport inside.
That's right.
What we did was we practiced some very ancient meditative tradition,
Which is not for publication.
which we can't share.
I'm sorry.
But somehow we changed our entire place, and it's a practicing Jew today that's looking to get into Jewish meditation. And there's we just laid out a whole plethora of historical traditions. Where do they begin, in your advice, in your opinion?
Well, it is one of my very deep-held understandings that we are in a very different world than we were 200 even, and certainly back years ago. And we are different people. We are a different subject. We are different types of individuals. We think about ourselves differently, about our freedom differently, about our autonomy differently, about our subjects of authority, of meaning, of identity differently. And so for us to simply pluck out a meditative system from the past is hard. Specifically within the Jewish tradition, which was always concerned, as we said, with metaphysical structures, with actions. This is part of the reasons why Buddhist meditation and Hindu meditation of some sorts is much more popular today, because it's from its inception, it laid an emphasis on the internal worlds, on psychology, on mindfulness, on the consciousness. And that is what we're looking for today. And so in the Jewish tradition, it's hard to find it. But I will say, if you are interested in something that is traditionally Jewish and can be very easily, I think, practiced today or adapted to practice today, I will say two things. One, Maimonides. Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, because chapter 51, again, from the last part of his Guide to the Perplexed, Maimonides was ahead of his time in many different ways, but also his meditative system is a lot about concentration, a lot even about mindfulness, and I think it can be adapted. And even more so, this is already a modern person, Rabbi Kalmish Clonimus Shapira, the tzaddik from Piaseczno, which we all know for his Esh Kodesh sermons from the Warsaw Ghetto. He was murdered in 1943 by the Nazis. He's very famous for that, but he also has a fantastic system, mystical, spiritual system, which does a lot of work with mindfulness, has a lot of correlation with Vipassana, Buddhist meditation, and I think it's simply brilliant. I think he is a major loss for the Jewish people. If he were not murdered by the Nazis, I do believe we would have a whole other stream of Jewish mysticism today, or Jewish practitioners in his lineage, system.
Right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's a great loss.
Where can someone go to access his
I
system?
mean, I wrote it. I think I'm not going. I mean, I have to say, I think the best exposition of it is in my book, and because he wrote it in different books, some of which were not even published in his life, and you have to take together, connect the dots, and you see a whole system there.
This is your book that you wrote in Hebrew.
Yeah, this is a book that came out of my dissertation. It's called Jewish Meditation, or the Jewish Meditative Tradition. It was published by Tel Aviv University Press, and it's in Hebrew, and I would love for it to be in English. I think it is needed in English. And so if anyone hears us and wants to fund/publish a translation of the book, it's up for grabs.
Or if there are any translators in the audience that can have it themselves.
I mean, it's an academic book. You need to translate it properly, but please, I'm really...
We're speaking to you.
I'm really for it.
Awesome. And okay, so that's in terms of where someone may turn to today. I'm always curious. You've done a lot of work on embodiment and the way that these traditions or practices are embodied within the person. And when I'm speaking to someone, I'd like to believe that they're also an embodied person in their own life and their own narrative. How did you get into all this? How did you come to it?
Well, okay. There's a story there, obviously. I grew up in Haifa, in Israel, in a secular atheist family. And what happened to me is what happens to not too little Israelis, not too few Israelis, is going to India after the army. I was in India, and I thought, well, since I'm in India, I'm going to check out all these gurus, ashrams, meditative courses, etc. And I did. And I got hooked up with Vipassana. And I practiced Vipassana very diligently for more than a decade. And it did me a lot of good. I do recommend it. And through that, I got into meditation, to learning about meditation, to learning about Jewish meditation, to learning about Judaism, to learning about my tradition, about the Jewish life, etc. And then to write a dissertation on Jewish meditation, past and present. So in short, that's what happened to me. Today, I still practice Vipassana, but I'm also a traditional Jew. I'm not Orthodox, but I'm an observant Jew, and so I also pray, and as Jews do, and I try to learn from to integrate these traditions as beneficial as possible, and to get closer to that.
Do you find ways of integrating your Vipassana practices with your traditional Jewish practice?
Yeah, I don't think it's too hard. I mean, you can be mindful over anything you do. So, it's even all over Hasidism. If you connect thought to act, you connect Kudsha Brichu V'Shchintei. It's written all over the place. So that's what I try to do.
Yes,
I try to be present when praying, when blessing, etc.
I think someone needs to write a study on the army to India to mystical academia pipeline.
Yeah. It's far from being unique. Yeah, it's amazing how many scholars of contemporary spirituality are actually researching themselves.
Yes. I think Jeffrey Kripal, Professor Kripal, wrote a book on scholars of mysticism as self-exploration.
I love him. I love his books. Yes. I love his work. I recommend his book.
Awesome.
His work. Yeah.
You have been so great, generous and gracious with your time, and I know that you have to pick up your kids from school soon. I'd just like to say that there's a lot more that we have to discuss, and maybe they'll be around too. Who knows if the viewers demand it for an encore. There's a lot of talk that you've published on the methodology of your research into meditation, which in a way is very groundbreaking. Like there really hasn't been a lot of rigorous work. And I've enjoyed reading that work in preparation for the interview.
And my new book.
Yes, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to pitch to the audience, anyone who's still listening at this point must have really enjoyed the conversation. Tell us about your latest work and about where they can find you online. You're very prolific online as well.
Thank you. So, I have a Twitter account, I have a Facebook account, and I have a blog, though they are mostly in Hebrew. I have an English blog, and things that are translated are there. It's Tomer Persico, WordPress, English. And I publish here and there, and my new book is about the idea of the image of God, the idea that all humans were created in the divine image, and how it was a seminal influence in the development of Western institutions that we hold dear, such as liberalism, democracy, individualism, and even secularism. This book has been translated.
Oh, wonderful.
Though not published yet. And again, if anybody wants to, I'm looking for a publisher now. And I hope it will be published within the year or two.
Nice.
And then...
Nice. It's an awesome book.
Thank you.
All of my friends are reading it. They're loving it.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you.
So I can recommend it as well. And looking forward for it to be in English. If there are any publishers out there listening or any agents, hit us up. The title of the book in Hebrew is
אדם בצלם אלוהים, הרעיון ששינה את העולם והיהדות.
And what's the title in English going to be?
It's going to be, I think, In God's Image, the idea of individuality, freedom, and conscience, I think.
Awesome. Tomer, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you for inviting me, and yeah, I'm up to another round if such if that happens to be relevant.
Very cool. I hope so. This has been thoroughly engaging and thoroughly meditative in its own way. and looking forward to continuing to get to know you
Right.
and to learn from you.
Right.
And thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing. And
Thank
putting
you
out.
very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for viewing.
Yes, and thank you to the Shalom Hartman Institute for hosting us here.
I thought you were going to say to the Kadosh Baruch Hu.
You know, in Chabad, first we thank the Rebbe, and then we thank God. It's like the
So, yeah.
hierarchy. Mitzian,
אחלה.
that was good fun.
יאללה.
Thanks for coming.
תודה.
Thanks
על
for
זה.
doing it.
כן, האמת